2021 was a good year for motorcycle companies. Motorcycle sales rose over 9% in the UK alone, for example. In part, this is due to the world opening up more, but I think it's more than that. Companies like Triumph and Ducati and Harley and Royal Enfield and others really did a great job of in-house marketing for their new motorcycles, and the sales were really reflected. In this video, we're looking at the coolest, best, most interesting motorcycles of 2021. These aren't simply bikes that were unveiled in 2021. No, these are the bikes that were actually released and that people got their hands on, or bikes that were heavily updated for 2021. So sit back and relax. We're looking at the 21 coolest motorcycles of 2021, and make sure to watch the video all the way through, as there's some bikes on this list that I bet many of you have not even heard of. So let's start with one of the standout bikes of 2021, whether for good or for bad, the Harley Davidson Sportster S. Now, I've put this one pretty low on the list as it wasn't exactly a revolutionary motorcycle for Harley, piggybacking off of their new liquid-cooled platform for the Pan America, also making a rather cartoonish motorcycle. I don't know. Yeah, it's different, and we can't fault Harley for that. They did build something unique, which I think is cool. It's got that sort of flat tracker look, kind of Indian FTR-ish. The bike certainly looks cool. It's just a completely impractical motorcycle with less suspension travel than your grandpa's knees, and tires that look like they would only be good for like a tire swing. Yeah, it's a weird one, but I think it's a good move for Harley. Harley needs to keep trying new things, and this is certainly a platform that they can build off, which seems to really be the plan. I don't think this is the only Sportster they're going to make. I think they're going to make better, more like reasonable Sportsters in the future. But this bike certainly got the headlines, and listen, it is cool. Like, it's definitely cool. Number 20 goes to the updated Triumph T100. This is a bike that I wanted to get for a long time, arguably the bike that got me back interested in motorcycles, but always sitting at a little bit too high of a price point for what I really wanted and for what it has to offer. Now that gap has actually been closed as of 2021, as it was given the specs of the current Street Twin, so it now makes 64 horsepower instead of 55, and I think this makes perfect sense. The T100 is really the cheapest bike that Triumph has to offer that still looks like an old British bike from their lineup. Like, the Street Twin is more affordable, but it's overall kind of more of a cruiser, in my opinion, in terms of its stance and look, and like having the modern cockpit without like the dual gauges. Anyways, it really makes it less classic looking to me. I've always felt that the T100 should cost less than the Street Twin, but it's obviously, a bit more to produce regardless. Whatever. You're going to definitely get more bang for your buck with the new T100. I'm glad they updated it. I think it's a really important update, and it makes sense that it would make more power and have, for example, the 6-speed transmission. It's a good update. All right, we briefly mentioned it at the beginning. The Pan America really was a standout bike for Harley, and the only reason it's not higher on this list is because this just isn't really my kind of motorcycle. Like, it doesn't really fall into the cool factor for me. I will say though, the Pan America looks better in person. It is a big old chunk of a motorcycle, but it's got all the stuff and more really that riders in this segment want. Plenty of power at 150 horsepower, some new tech with things like this adaptive ride height, something that's really been missing, in my opinion, from adventure bikes for a long time. Like, it's cool to see Harley make something and innovate with something new that is really, really good and fitting for this segment. Adventure bikes are so tall and like so unapproachable for shorter riders because not only are they tall, they're also incredibly heavy. So the idea of a bike that when you get on it is lower and then it like raises up, like having it lower down for you when you get on and off just makes perfect sense to me. And it's also great for riding over logs or whatever you're doing in a 600-pound adventure bike. At one point, Harley was claiming that it was the best-selling adventure bike, outselling the BMW GS worldwide, but who knows if they've kept those numbers up. It's definitely been a success for Harley though, and it's great to see them branch out and do new things. At this point, it's weird though because Harley really feels divided. Like, their lineup feels so divided. You've got these modern, sort of cooler bikes that are more for like the modern rider, and I guess you could say they sort of represent the future for Harley, but then you've still got these classic looking like Harleys, and there's so many of them that they've been making for like forever. It's just hard to see where Harley is going at this point. And for some reason it feels like, even though Indian has a very similar lineup to Harley, it feels less divided. Like, their cruisers feel more modern to me. I don't know. Anyways, the Pan America definitely deserves a spot on this list. Now next we have a bike that's an update, but it's more than an update. It's really a new motorcycle. You've got a completely new engine, new frame. And yeah, this is the classic 350 from Royal Enfield. It is heavy, obviously. It's slow. It's a Royal Enfield. But it's a great entry-level bike. Sadly, it's not available here in the US quite yet. I'm not sure what their plans are for the US. I think it could do well. I'm not 100% sure. I mean, I just imagine if you walk into a Royal Enfield dealer and you see this bike, and let's say you're coming to look at an Interceptor or something like that, and you see this bike is like $1,500 or $2,000 less than the Interceptor, I feel like there's going to be people who are going to want it. And the fact that it's like a classically styled bike really makes it stand out from bikes at this price point and from bikes that are of a similar like power or CC, you know, like the other sort of budget singles like the KTM 390 and BMW 310. It's probably never going to sell as much as like a KTM 390 here in the US, as it's just lacking so much performance and weighs so much more. But it really has that look. You know, it doesn't look like a praying mantis or like a spaceship. It looks like a real motorcycle. So I have to think that there's a lot of people when they're, you know, going to go compare a KTM 390 and this bike, they're going to pick this bike just because, you know, neither bikes are good on the highway and this thing looks a lot cooler. So I think it could do well here. Definitely a standout bike for 2021 for Royal Enfield. Okay, a bit of a change up for this one. The Ovale, I think I'm saying that right, GP2 190. Now I'm guessing there's a good chance many of you have not heard of this company, Ovale. They're basically making small displacement race-ready motorcycles for young riders to improve their skills and learn what it's like to operate a proper race machine, but just do it in like a compact, smaller form. The thing that Ovale wants to get across is that it's not just another pocket bike. Like it's not a pocket rock. These really are like mini race machines. These are 4-stroke motors, first of all, not 2 strokes. And you can choose from both automatic or 4-speed options, which is pretty crazy. Imagine a 4-stroke, like 4-speed bike. And these even have GP shift, which is so cool. Like up, 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 down, down, down. Like it's really cool. The new GP2 190 for 2021 is a bit bigger and longer. It's got a new chassis, new swing arm, 12-inch wheels. Basically, it's kind of like a step up for kids and for young riders who want something a bit bigger. I'm curious what you guys think this would cost. You know, obviously it's not going to cost as much as like a normal pocket rocket. It's obviously going to be way more. So what do you think? I'm going to tell you in a second, but I'm curious what your guess is. Okay, the right number for this bike is $6,500. It's obviously not street legal. This is a track bike, and I'm really curious how these do in the US, as there's not a big scene for junior like road racing. It's more dirt stuff here that dominates. Whereas in places like Spain, I can totally understand a bike doing really well there. And when you think about it, this price isn't that bad. Like if you were wanting to get a small KTM, basically race ready dirt bike for say some kid who's like 9 or 10 or 11 or 12, you're going to spend this much anyways. Like you're going to spend at least $6,000. So it makes sense. Like this could cost even more. And for what it is, I think it's a pretty cool package. I'm going to link a video below for you guys of Zach Kortz riding this on a go-kart track. It's pretty amazing. And as always, Zach Kortz is being really humble about his riding skills as he absolutely shreds up this go-kart track on this little pocket bike thing. So anyways, it's very cool. Definitely check it out. Next, we have an updated bike, a big update for the Moto Guzzi V7. Now repping a new 850cc engine up from the 750 and making 65 horsepower. So this bike, yeah, it's cool. Yeah, it's rare. Yeah, it's Italian and classic looking. You know, it's a Guzzi. But now it's got proper performance and can hang with the likes of the Triumph T110 and Street Twin. This is really where these bikes should be, in my opinion. Nice and torquey, but enough horsepower to really get you around. If you're going to spend 9, 10, 11 grand on a motorcycle, you'd better get a machine that can cruise down the highway. And 50, 55 horsepower, it's a little lacking. And also, this bike and the T120 both bumping up to a 6-speed transmission is absolutely huge. Like that makes such a difference for the rideability of these bikes. So in my opinion, the V7, this new updated one, is a great update for 2021. Next up, we have another Royal Enfield. This time it's the Meteor. Now this has to be one of Royal Enfield's best-selling bikes currently. This thing is everywhere. Like I see everyone talking about it. I see it all over the place. Here in the US, I'm not sure how well it's done. I feel like it's more popular in other countries, and especially in India. It feels like everybody in India has one of these. It's really more of a cruiser, and here in the US, there's a big divide between retro guys and girls and like cruiser guys and girls. And this bike is sort of a mix, being a Royal Enfield, but sort of having that cruiser posture. Regardless, it's the same power plant that's on the classic 350, so it's also slow and also heavy, but it's so damn cheap at about like $4,500. I think the move for Royal Enfield here in the US would be to get this little thumper engine into an Interceptor-esque bike and sell a little retro style bike, that's like the Interceptor but smaller and has that sort of classic British style, not the World War II style of the classic 350 or the cruiser that is the Meteor. If they could develop a twin, even like a really small twin like the Interceptor, but about half the capacity, I don't know, maybe that wouldn't work. Maybe it would have like 10 horsepower if they did that. But regardless, the Meteor is a really cool little bike, and there's lots of great options for Royal Enfield. It seems like moving forward, they're really like innovating and learning how to make different kinds of bikes and really making bikes that people want. You can say what you want about Royal Enfield. I'm a fan, honestly. I think the more I've researched their stuff, I just have become more of a fan of them as a company, if that wasn't obvious from the video I made, like a week ago. Anyways, check that video out. It's pretty good. So on to the next one. All right, now we've gotten to some bikes that are sort of a different kind of cool, like actually cool. The new Speed Triple RS, boasting like 30 more horsepower than the previous generation and looking like an absolute monster of a motorcycle. This was unveiled, I believe, at the beginning of last year, and this really is, in my opinion, the peak of Triumph innovation at this point, and really making special premium motorcycles. A 180 horsepower triple. This is basically an all-new engine with a higher red line and way up on the torque with 125 newton meters of torque. That is over 90 foot-pounds of torque. And Jake Dixon said it right. It is an absolute weapon of a motorcycle, but it's smooth, it's usable on the roads for how much bike it is, and it's also great for the track as well. So Speed Triple RS, no doubt, one of the standout bikes of 2021. All right, number 13 goes to the Aprilia Tuono 660. Aprilia bringing back some fun to the middleweight category with the RS 660 and the Tuono, and now the Touareg coming out next year. This is really a solid platform. If you want a proper Italian motorcycle that's actually affordable, Aprilia is much cheaper in general. I think this is the way to go. Obviously, dealer support isn't, up to snuff with the likes of, for example, Ducati, and many, myself included, don't really care for the overall design of Aprilias. Like, I think Ducatis and MV Agustas and even Moto Guzzis look a lot better personally, but these are proper machines, and Aprilia has really invested in just making really good motorcycles. They're just solid, great performing bikes. People love this weird, more sort of upright sport street fighter-y look. For me, this looks more like a sport bike than a street fighter, but people do put it into that street fighter category. So if you do consider it that, this is like a baby street fighter, which is pretty cool, and obviously, way more affordable than pretty much any street fighter you could get, even including the Triumph Street Triple. Like, I'm pretty sure this is cheaper than a Street Triple. So anyways, cool bike, definitely worth checking out. Another Italian bike with a nice update, or sort of a special version, is the MV Agusta F3RR. Now, the F3 is basically the last and current sport bike offered from MV Agusta. I do hope MV Agusta brings back the F4. Not that I would ever buy a new F4, but it'd be really cool if they brought back the F4 and it made 230 horsepower. That would be cool. Anyways, the Super Veloce is also on this F3 platform, but this is the bike for track days and for racing for MV Agusta. And the F3RR is sort of born out of MV Agusta's race development currently, with things like extra winglets for downforce and loads of carbon fiber. And the power is up to a potential 155 horsepower with the road legal race kit available, which is pretty insane from an 800cc triple. When you think about Triumph Speed Triple making peak 180 horsepower, finally getting up to that number from a 1200cc platform. This is an 800cc platform. So imagine if MV Agusta made a 1000 triple, which I think could be coming in the future. It'd be really fast. But yeah, it's just cool to see what MV does. It's always cool to see what they do with their designs. This one's really surprising. I love the black and white. I think it looks fantastic on this really aggressive looking F3 platform. It's a classic design. It's been around for forever in different iterations. What I don't understand is the trailer that they released for this bike. You know, like there's this kid playing video games, I guess, and he's the target audience. I don't know. As if there's kids in America just wishing they could get an MV Agusta F3. You know, what young rider has even heard of MV Agusta? I feel like, I don't know, the whole commercial just kind of felt a bit out of touch. MV riders are generally older, I would assume. Young sport bike riders know of, you know, Gixxers and sure Ducati Panigales, but they don't have enough money to buy them. But there's very few young sport riders who are even considering an MV Agusta F3. You know, it's a luxury bike, it's a luxury brand. Regardless, it's beautiful, even if the ad didn't totally hit home. Next up, we have the CF Moto CLX 700. This is the latest from Chinese motorcycle manufacturer CF Moto, and it's worth noting, Visor Down calls this bike a neo-retro flat track roadster. And as big of a mouthful as that may be, it's basically spot on. When you look at this bike long enough, all those words kind of make sense. It's got that sort of Triumph Trident look. Classic, but modern, but also kind of sporty, but also kind of upright and laid back. I don't know, it's a weird bike. This bike is powered by Kawasaki's, you know, what was Kawasaki's Z650 engine, but at this point, it has gone through enough updates that CF Moto can pretty much claim it as their own engine. It's a liquid-cooled parallel twin repping 73 horsepower. That's roughly the same as a Ducati Scrambler, and it costs about the same, for reference. So it's cool to see a Chinese motorcycle company making proper motorcycles like this one. Time will tell if it's worth that price tag or if CF Moto can really continue and sort of innovate and build their own platforms. But for now, this bike is definitely a step in the right direction. It's a cool looking, definitely the coolest looking Chinese motorcycle that you can get that's really original looking, you know. Number 10 goes to the Honda Rebel 1100, and what Honda did with this is they took their Rebel platform and really made it so much better and so much more than it's ever been. You know, this isn't just like a beginner bike. It's powerful, it's approachable as well, utilizing the engine from the Africa Twin. It is affordable for what it is at just under 10K. Now, I don't think it's bringing over a whole lot of Harley riders or anything like that, as it just doesn't have the character or the sound or really anything being offered by, you know, Harley or Indian, but it's reliable. It's Honda's reliable version of a cruiser, which is what they've kind of always done well. Usable, bulletproof, it's what people expect from Honda. It's a pretty pokey bike at 80 horsepower and under 500 pounds wet, which is pretty rare for this big of a cruiser. I think the Rebel 1100 has received pretty much universal praise, so if you're in the market for a bike like this, and you don't want to spend a whole lot of money for a Harley, this could be a really good option, and you cannot go wrong with a Honda. Number 9 is a bike that I've talked about a few times. I actually just saw one of these a few weeks back cruising around a B road. I think the Trident plus the bike that we're about to talk about really show what Triumph is capable of as a motorcycle manufacturer. This bike is arguably the best overall buy for almost everybody for new bikes in 2021. If you want that nice fit and finish you get from a Triumph, the British motorcycle sort of pedigree, but if you don't want to spend like $15,000, this bike really has it all. Plenty of tech, arguably more tech than anything else in its class. Great performance, dead reliability with this 660 engine, and it looks pretty great in my opinion. There's something about the overall look that I don't totally vibe with. It's almost retro, but not quite, and that kind of hurts me a little bit. It's like a weird mix between like a retro bike and then something like an MV Agusta dragster. Like there's kind of weird similarities between it and MV Agusta's naked 800 bikes. Anyways, the Triumph Trident definitely belongs on this list as one of the standout bikes from Triumph. I would say even in the past 10 years of all the bikes Triumph have brought out, this bike is one of the standout motorcycles. Next up, we have another Triumph, the Speed Triple RR. Really no different in terms of performance and specs from the Speed Triple RS that we mentioned earlier. Here, though, it's the look. A look that, interestingly enough, looks to be getting a copy in the Honda concept bike that was recently unveiled. I'm curious if you guys see this, if you can see the similarities. But yeah, this overall look is a bit of a copy anyways from Triumph. I mean, it looks like a Super Veloce if you compare them. Regardless, it's different enough and it's a great looking bike, that sort of sport bike look without all the plastics. Like it kind of looks like a sport bike that's being worked on. Like they took the side panels off to work on the engine and they forgot to put it back together. It kind of has that look, but a little more intentional. It's like a cross between a sport bike and a naked bike or a street fighter. I'm not sure this aesthetic totally works with the Speed Triple platform, but I think Triumph making like really high-end limited sport bikes like this, or maybe bringing back the Daytona, that's the kind of thing that people want and can actually bring in a ton of revenue for a motorcycle company. In this case, it's just sort of a dressed up speed triple. Anyways, definitely one of the standout bikes for 2021. All right, now we've come to a bike I'm guessing many of you have not heard of. This is the Volcon Grunt. Probably the best named new motorcycle for 2021. I mean, it's like the perfect name for an electric bike. It's like the one thing electric motorcycles have is grunt. Anyways, it was released in 2021. It's fully electric and it's pretty weird. It reminds me a lot of the Volcon bikes, and that makes sense because it's sort of serving the same purpose. This has a 40 mile per hour top speed and top range of 75 miles. Roadshow calls it an electric mountain goat of a motorcycle. It's really meant for trails, basically, and I think it really stands out in this segment. Electric bikes really can make sense for off-road purposes. They're torquey, they're quiet, there's less going on with the whole like not having a combustion engine and like a fraction of the moving parts. So it really makes sense for off-road purposes. And this bike starts at $8,000, which in my opinion is not that bad. It's not great, it's kind of expensive, but it's not like completely outpriced for people who want to ride this kind of way. It's doable. It's like somewhat affordable. So pretty cool. All right, number 6, the Ducati Streetfighter V2, a nice middle ground for riders who want to get a Ducati and they want a bit more than the current monster has to offer because it's not offering that much. But, you know, they can't afford or they don't need a 200 horsepower monster machine that is the Streetfighter. This is like Ducati's naked bike that sits between those bikes. And the V2 is a much more approachable bike at 153 horsepower. This is a tried and true platform for Ducati. Torquey, full of character. Yeah, it's hard to imagine this is a bad bike. Now, the only downside is the price. It's about $2,000 or $3,000 too much, in my opinion. Probably like $2,000 too much. It leans more towards the Streetfighter V4 in terms of price. So only for a few thousand more, you can get the flagship Streetfighter. And I think most people in this market would just go for the bigger bike. Like if you're willing to spend 17 grand or whatever it is, wouldn't you also then be willing to just spend 19? I don't know. I think 14.5 or so would have probably made more sense for this bike's price, but I digress. What do I know? The fastest thing I've ever ridden was that 2-stroke pocket rocket, am I right? All right, number 5 goes to the Yamaha Tenere 700. Already this has become a staple sort of flagship middleweight bike. If I personally were to get into adventure bike riding, let's say light touring and a bit of off-road stuff, which is kind of what most people in this segment do, this is the bike I would get. Like I would consider a bike like the Touareg as it's kind of a bit cooler and flashier and has that sort of Dakar look. But when you factor in overall reliability and support, getting a Yamaha just makes sense. People swear by the T7. Like it is a bike that's changing the market and forcing other manufacturers to consider making smaller displacement, lighter bikes because that's really all you need for this kind of bike. I think that's a good thing that a lot of the companies that are making big, heavy, powerful adventure bikes, I think some of them should take a step back and make a bike more like the T7. Number 4 goes to a weird one that sadly isn't available in the US, the Kawasaki ZX25R. This is a 250cc inline 4 sort of baby sport bike that revs to a whopping 17,000 RPMs, a la the old baby GP bikes like Honda's Fireblade baby thing from the 90s. This bike is completely impractical and overpriced, or I guess priced at what it should be to make a little inline 4 revving that high, but it's totally cool. It sounds like an absolute dream. This is the kind of bike you want to get your son when they tell you they want to go get a leader bike. Just get them this. Have fun trying to get in trouble on a bike that makes virtually no power below, say, 12,000 RPMs. Just give it a listen and pay attention to how fast they're going. Number 3 goes to another Yamaha on the same platform, the R7, much like Aprilia and what they've done with their 660 platform, making 3 different bikes from it, though Yamaha did it backwards. Instead of starting with a sport bike, they started with the naked bike and they built an adventure and sport bike from that. But, you know, it's all the same thing. It's all just retuning and detuning an engine. The R7 is probably the coolest looking approachable sport bike that you can get. It's pretty aggressive in stance and it looks the part, but it's not like a high revving inline 4 or 3 cylinder. It's a pretty torquey, peppy twin coming from the MT-07. Now we just have to see if Triumph is going to bring back the Daytona with their 660 platform, which, by the way, that platform came from the Daytona. But anyways, and if they did that, they would have the same trifecta as Yamaha and Aprilia. So you'd have all three companies making middleweight bikes basically of the same CCs and making the exact same kinds of bikes, a sport bike, an adventure bike, and a naked bike. It's a weird world that we're living in with middleweight bikes sort of taking over at this point, but I think it's a good thing. Next up, we take a step in the other direction with the super limited, hyper expensive, literal race bike, of which only 100 were made, the Ducati Superleggera, the peak of Ducati engineering and design and innovation, the fastest thing on two wheels, 335 pounds dry. That is insane. But that's just the beginning. This is literally a race bike. Now that I think about it, my old Triumph weighs about the same as this bike, maybe slightly more, but not much more, because I believe mine is like 370 wet or so. So imagine my bike, the same weight as my bike, but 6 times the power. That's just crazy. The Superleggera will probably go down as one of the greatest steps forward in production motorcycling, like design and innovation from really our generation. Like you have quite a few bikes over the last 50 years that stand out, like production bikes that really were incredible leaps forward. The fact that you can buy a 234 horsepower bike that is literally a race bike and ride it to the coffee shop, it's crazy. The sad thing is, for me, people probably don't ride this bike. Like the people who own it, they're not taking it to the track, I would imagine. 99% of them are not actually riding them, which I guess makes sense. It's kind of an investment at that point. But anyways, crazy bike and definitely a sort of milestone motorcycle for Ducati. Now, number 1 is probably not what you'd expect. I'm going to go with the Regent number 1, which was finally released and delivered to customers in 2021. I know this because I'm part of the Regent Facebook group where everybody shares their bikes like getting delivered and stuff. And hey, seems like most people are happy. I talked about this bike in my video on retro electric motorcycles. This bike is arguably the best looking classically designed or classically styled retro electric motorcycle with pretty decent specs. And for me, the standout thing at this point is when one of these startups pop up, these sort of like boutique brands, I don't know, they show bikes and they promise things and it seems like many times they don't actually deliver. But to see a brand like this actually build the bikes and actually ship them out and deliver them and have an actual product, I just think it's really cool and it's really impressive and it gets my attention. Of course, support for a bike like this is tough, but they're such simple machines, so there's a lot less that can go wrong with just an electric bike. 75 miles of range approximately, top speed of about 77, which is really good. I mean, yeah, some people need to go faster than that, but ensure you're spending $10,000 or $11,000 or $12,000 or whatever on a bike that can't do 100. But anyways, it's a proper bike. Like it isn't just doing like 40 miles an hour. So I'm curious, for those of you who didn't watch my video on this bike, what do you guys think of this motorcycle? I think it's a really cool looking, classically designed electric motorcycle. Anyways, there's my list of 21 standout bikes from 2021. Let us know down below, what were the bikes released this year that you found really interesting, and maybe some of you are riding some of the bikes that I talked about in this list, and if so, give us your totally unbiased opinion about your ride. Thanks for watching. Here's to another year of motorcycle goodness. Ride safe.